Danger might be closer than you think. Before we begin, like this video, comment where and what time you're watching from, and subscribe for more chilling stories. Now turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive into the unknown. Story 1. I've always been an independent person, or at least I like to believe that I was. But after a divorce that left me emotionally drained, I realized I needed some time away from everything: people, social media, and the suffocating city routine. That's how I ended up renting a cabin by a lake in Maine, at the beginning of winter, when tourists had already left. It was a small but cozy place with a porch overlooking the frozen water and a fireplace that made a comforting crackling sound when lit. My plan was simple: drink wine, read books, and somehow try to relearn how to enjoy my own company. On the first morning, I went outside to breathe the cold air and noticed something strange near the back porch. Amidst the thin layer of snow, there was a circle of ashes and a cigarette butt that appeared hastily put out. My first thought was that the previous tenant had smoked there before leaving, but something didn't add up. The ashes were fresh and dry, as if they'd been left there only hours ago. I felt an uncomfortable shiver, but shrugged it off. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, and anything would seem scarier than it really was. I kicked some snow over it and went inside, convinced it meant nothing. The day passed without further incidents. I took a short walk around the cabin, enjoying the silence that seemed absolute. No cars drove by, no boats cut across the frozen surface of the lake. It was as if the whole world had stopped right there. In the evening, I lit the fireplace, made myself some tea, and wrapped up in a blanket with a book. I was just beginning to relax when I heard a noise coming from outside, something like a soft rustling, the sound of branches shifting. I stayed motionless for a moment, holding my breath. The wind, I thought. It can only be the wind. But something inside me didn't fully buy that explanation. I decided to shake off the paranoia and went to bed. However, in the morning, when I went out to get more firewood, I saw footprints. They started near the back porch and led to the side of the cabin, disappearing into the trees. Human footprints. The strangest thing? I hadn't seen anyone around since I arrived, and I myself hadn't gone to that part of the property. The unease from the previous night returned with full force. Maybe it was just a hunter, or a local passing by. Maybe. But the idea of someone circling my cabin while I slept made me deeply restless. I tried not to think too much about it and went on with my day. I tidied up the cabin a bit, cooked some soup, and spent the afternoon reading in the living room. But as the sun started to set, that uncomfortable feeling began to grow inside me again. The absolute silence, which had earlier felt like a relief, now felt oppressive. With each creak of the cabin's wood, each gust of wind outside, I found myself paying close attention, waiting. But waiting for what? I decided to lock all the doors and windows even before nightfall, just as a precaution. Still, my mind kept going back to those footprints, to that cigarette butt. This time I couldn't concentrate on the book. Any noise made my heart race. When I finally decided to go to bed, I checked the door once again, tested the lock, and closed the curtains. I lay beneath the covers but couldn't sleep at all. Yes, I was tired, but my body refused to relax. I stayed there, tossing and turning, listening to the wind hitting the window until I heard it again, the same sound from the previous night, but now it was closer, more distinct. Slow footsteps in the snow circling the cabin. My entire body tensed immediately. I held my breath, trying to hear better. The footsteps were slow, evenly spaced, as if whoever was out there didn't want to be noticed. A chill ran up my spine. I couldn't be imagining this. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't branches falling. Someone was outside, walking around the cabin. My first instinct was to grab my cell phone and call the police, but then I realized I had no signal. The connection fluctuated inside the house, and over the last 2 days I had barely managed to load a web page. I lay there, frozen, trying to think clearly. I could turn on all the lights to scare whoever it was away, but that would also reveal exactly where I was. I could scream, but what if it was just a hunter or someone who was lost? Then, suddenly the footsteps stopped. The silence stretched out in a way that made me even more anxious. I strained to hear anything at all, but what came next made my blood run cold. the sound of something pressing against the front door handle. It was subtle but unmistakable, as if someone was testing the handle, carefully trying to turn it without making noise. My heart raced, and for a moment, I was completely frozen, unsure of what to do. I was absolutely certain I had locked the door. But what if I hadn't? What if, in my distraction, I had forgotten? My stomach sank at the thought. I held my breath, forcing my eyes toward the door, which I could barely see in the darkness of the room. The sound stopped. Once again, absolute silence. But now, every muscle in my body screamed with alertness. Then, another noise, softer, almost imperceptible, as if someone were slowly sliding their hand along the wooden surface of the door. A light, careful touch. My chest rose and fell rapidly, air escaping in small, uncontrolled bursts. Then, without warning, a click echoed through the silence, the unmistakable sound of the lock cylinder turning from the outside. My blood ran cold. It wasn't possible. I had locked that door, I was sure of it. But then I saw the door handle move very slowly. Someone was opening the door. My instinct was to leap out of bed and rush to the darkest corner of the room, huddling next to the dresser. My heart pounded so fiercely it felt like it might explode. I held my breath, waiting, desperately hoping it was some kind of mistake, praying the door wouldn't open fully. But then, I heard a faint creak. The door was opening. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was paralyzed. My eyes locked onto the dark gap between the door and its frame, which was now slowly widening. The entire cabin was engulfed in shadows, yet I could sense something was there. Someone. Then abruptly, the creaking stopped. The gap remained open, but nothing happened. No movement, no sound, just a dark void, waiting. That was worse than anything. The fear of what might be there was suffocating me. The seconds seemed to drag on endlessly. I kept waiting for a footstep, a sound, anything to confirm that someone was there. But all that existed was silence in that open gap. I couldn't see anything beyond the darkness in the hallway. Could the person be standing there, watching me? My entire body shook. Every fiber of my being begged me to do something. But what? Then, the most subtle of sounds reached me. Breathing. Shallow, quiet, coming from the direction of the door. That was enough to break me out of my trance of terror. Without thinking, my hand fumbled blindly until it found something. A small metal lamp lying on the floor, which I'd knocked over earlier. In a desperate impulse, I grabbed the object and threw it with all my strength towards the door. The sound was loud, metallic, booming through the stillness. The door shifted slightly from the impact, but what made me hold my breath was another sound. A step backward, a sudden movement, as if the person on the other side had been startled. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. The person was still there. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were close by. Then, a second later, came the most terrifying sound of all. Hurried footsteps moving away. The faint crunch of snow being compressed under heavy boots, heading towards the forest behind the cabin. I stood frozen, listening as the sound gradually faded until absolute silence once again enveloped everything. I didn't move for several long minutes. My entire body remained rigid, expecting the footsteps to return, the door to swing fully open, something, anything to happen. But nothing did. Everything seemed quiet. Still holding my breath, I dragged myself to the door and gently pushed it closed with just the tips of my fingers. My hands trembled, but I managed to turn the key in the lock. It was locked. This time I checked it 3 times. My mind was spinning. Who was that person? What did they want? And worse, how long had they been there watching me? I tried to convince myself that it was over, that the intruder had gone away. But what if they came back? I grabbed a chair and dragged it close to the door, wedging it firmly under the handle as an extra blockade. Then, I rushed to the window and looked outside. Nothing. Just untouched snow illuminated by the moonlight and the darkness of the forest just beyond. I didn't close my eyes for the rest of the night. I sat curled up in the corner of the bedroom, clutching a kitchen knife I'd grabbed from the drawer, struggling to keep my breathing steady. Every small creak of the cabin's wood made my body tense up again. But nobody returned. No other sounds. No movement. When the first ray of sunlight pierced through the curtains, I finally gathered enough courage to step outside the bedroom. My head was still spinning with fear and adrenaline as I carefully walked through the cabin. And then, I saw something that made my blood freeze once again. Near the front door, on the wooden floor, was something I was absolutely certain hadn't been there the night before. A small piece of paper, carefully folded. My stomach sank. With trembling hands, I bent down and picked it up. As I unfolded it, a shiver ran through my entire body, head to toe. Handwritten, in small, uneven letters, there was only one sentence. "You sleep heavily." My entire body froze. It wasn't possible. That person, they had been inside my cabin. It wasn't just someone lurking outside. They had actually come in. This wasn't just a passing scare. It was something dense, suffocating that made me want to flee from there as fast as possible. My mind began to panic. How hadn't I noticed? How had someone managed to enter without waking me up? And even worse, why did they want me to know they'd been inside? My body was shaking. How hadn't I noticed? How could someone enter without me waking up? Why did they want me to know this? My body trembled as panic set in. My gaze moved through every corner of the cabin. I had to leave, but I also needed to make sure nothing else was out of place. Then I remembered the food. I'd already noticed that some things seemed to have moved slightly. Now it all made sense. Someone had been eating my food without me realizing it. The thought of someone secretly living off me, coming and going unnoticed, terrified me. This wasn't just any intruder. This person had been here for days, perhaps even before I arrived. My legs shook as I grabbed the things I could and rushed to leave. The cold air hit my face, but I barely felt it. Each step toward the car seemed longer than it should have been. I glanced around, expecting to see someone among the trees, some kind of movement, anything. But what I saw was worse. On the side of the cabin, in the snow, were footprints again. Fresh footprints. Footprints that had stopped right by the cabin wall as if someone had stood there for a long time. The realization hit me like ice. While I was inside, terrified, that person had stood outside, motionless, watching me, perhaps waiting for me to leave. A chill ran down my spine. I needed to get out of there right now. I pressed the key fob, unlocking the car doors with a loud beep that echoed harshly through the silence of the woods. Cold air hit my face, but I barely felt it. I took each step as fast as I could, tossed my bags into the back seat, and climbed into the driver's seat, locking the doors behind me immediately. I pressed the ignition button and heard the engine roar to life. My heart was pounding as I reversed hastily down the dirt driveway. When I reached the main road, I glanced reluctantly into the rearview mirror. I didn't want to, but something inside compelled me to look. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the woods, exactly where the snow met the shadows, there stood someone. A still silhouette, perfectly motionless, watching, just standing there, waiting. A chill ran down my spine. I pressed harder on the accelerator, eager to escape as fast as possible. My palms were sweating on the steering wheel, my breath short and desperate. Each tree passing outside the window seemed to hide something, some movement. My mind couldn't decide if all this was real, or if I was on the edge of losing it. When I finally reached the main town road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to look, but I had to. The road was empty behind me. Nobody had followed, at least as far as I could tell. But that didn't reassure me. I pulled over at the first gas station I found and parked beneath the glaring fluorescent lights. My head was spinning, fear and adrenaline clouding my thoughts. I knew I had to tell someone, but what exactly? That someone had broken into my cabin and left me a note? That they'd been watching me for days without me noticing? And what if no one believed me? After a few minutes trying to catch my breath, I got out of the car and walked into the gas station. The place was almost empty, just a bored attendant behind the counter and an older man drinking coffee at one of the stools. I approached the cashier, my voice trembling as I asked where the nearest police station was. The attendant looked at me curiously, but just grabbed a piece of paper and scribbled an address. "It's small, but there's always someone there," he said without much concern. I arrived at the police station shortly after. It was a modest building with only one officer at the reception desk. I explained everything that had happened, trying to remain calm, though my voice wavered at each detail. The officer listened with a serious expression, jotting down notes here and there. When I finished, he crossed his arms and took a deep breath. "This isn't the first time we've heard something like this around here," he said. "Some cabins sit empty for months, sometimes years, and some people take advantage of that." My skin prickled upon hearing that. "Take advantage how?" I asked, feeling my stomach twist. The officer shrugged, looking tired. "Some are just homeless people looking for shelter. Others," he paused as if carefully choosing his words. "Well, some people enjoy the idea of hiding, of living in the shadows, of coming and going unnoticed." My body went rigid. The idea that someone could be there purely for pleasure, creeping in the dark, watching me while I slept, filled me with a dread unlike anything I'd ever felt before. The officer asked if I wanted someone to go check the cabin. I shook my head quickly. I never wanted to return to that place again. I asked to file a report and left, feeling that, even with distance, the experience still clung to me. I spent the night at a cheap motel in town, but sleep wouldn't come. Someone had hidden in those woods, inside that cabin, watching me at my most vulnerable moments. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined footsteps outside my room, the door handle turning slowly. And the worst part? I'd never know who it was. The following morning, I made one last stop at the rental agency where I'd booked the cabin. I told the employee, an older man, everything that had happened. He just sighed and nodded knowingly. "It's happened before," he said. "Cabins get left empty for months, sometimes years. People take advantage." That was the final confirmation I needed. I took my belongings and left, vowing never to return. I went home feeling like I'd left a part of myself behind in that cabin. For weeks afterward, I'd wake in the middle of the night convinced I'd heard footsteps outside my window. I became obsessive about checking locks, double and triple checking them before bed. But the worst part wasn't the fear that this person might find me again. It was the realization that I'd never know who they were. The police never found anything beyond a few footprints and scraps of food hidden beneath the cabin's porch. No real trace, no identity. Just a ghost living at the edge of society, watching those who passed nearby. And the note, that awful note, the words forever burned into my memory. "You sleep heavily." Story 2. When my wife and I found the house, it seemed perfect. It was small, secluded, exactly what we wanted. We'd been looking for a fresh start, something entirely ours. The real estate agent had warned us it was isolated, and most people preferred to live closer to the city. But for us, that was a bonus. We didn't hesitate and bought it immediately. Little did we know the issue wasn't with the house itself, but what it hid. Our only neighbor was an elderly man living next door. He kept to himself, never saying hello or making conversation. At first, we didn't mind. Some people just enjoy their solitude, right? But then, small things started to happen. Lights turning themselves on after we left. Strange scratches on the walls. Furniture that seemed out of place. At first, we brushed it off. Maybe we'd forgotten turning the lights off. Or maybe we'd moved something and didn't remember. We rationalized every oddity, but eventually it became impossible to ignore. We felt a constant, uncomfortable stare whenever we stepped into our backyard or returned from shopping. It always seemed to come from next door. Occasionally, we caught quick movements behind our neighbor's curtains, as if someone was quickly stepping away to avoid being seen. Things escalated the day we found the back door unlocked. I was certain I'd locked it before leaving. Then one morning my wife frowned and asked, "Did you move the couch?" The sofa was slightly pulled away from the wall, as if someone had pushed it aside and then hastily moved it back. Small enough to appear as a mistake, yet significant enough to send an uneasy shiver down our spines. After that day, we started paying closer attention. Gradually, we noticed other things out of place. Slowly, we realized more things were off. Lights turning on by themselves when we were out. Strange scratches on the walls and furniture that seemed slightly moved. The last straw came one night when we woke to an odd noise from downstairs. A scratching sound, low, repetitive, coming from within the walls. My heart started racing and my wife gripped my arm tightly. Something wasn't right. We stayed frozen, listening. Suddenly, another sound broke the silence, a faint creak, as though someone was moving slowly downstairs. My throat tightened as I tried to keep calm. My wife stared at me, eyes wide, expecting me to do something. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and switched on the flashlight. deciding to check downstairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, the flashlight shaking slightly in my hands. When I reached the bottom, the living room appeared empty, but just as I began to relax, I noticed the basement door slightly ajar. I froze. It was always kept closed. I was certain I'd locked it. My gut told me not to approach, yet I couldn't resist. I carefully moved toward it, slowly pushing it open with my foot. A chill crept down my spine as I looked inside. In the farthest corner of the basement, hidden among stacks of old boxes and discarded furniture, there was a small clearing. Inside was a makeshift bed of blankets, scraps of food scattered around, and something else, a rusted knife. My stomach turned. Someone had been living there, in our basement. Fear took hold of me in a way I'd never felt before. My eyes scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. The air felt dense, heavy, as if the basement itself was holding its breath with me. My first instinct was to run upstairs and lock the door, but a terrifying doubt froze me in place. What if this person was still here? My hands trembled so much I almost dropped my phone. I took a step back, the old wooden floor creaking beneath my feet. That's when I heard it. A low, dragging sound coming from deeper inside the basement. My body locked up completely. It wasn't a rat. It wasn't the wind. It was breathing. Short, quiet breaths, as if someone was desperately trying not to be heard. My muscles shifted into survival mode. I spun around and bolted upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time. As soon as I passed through the door, I slammed it shut behind me, locking it immediately and pressing my weight against it, convinced something might burst out any second. My wife was already in the living room when I arrived, her face pale as she watched me slam and lock the basement door with shaking hands. "What happened?" she asked, but my mouth was too dry to respond. I pointed toward the basement door, trying to find the right words. "Someone's down there," I finally managed to choke out. Without hesitation, we grabbed the phone and called the police. Waiting for the officers felt like an eternity. We stood by the front door, far away from the basement entrance, listening for any slightest noise. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound. When the police finally arrived, they checked the basement thoroughly, leaving us waiting anxiously near the front door. After several tense minutes, one of the officers came up looking grim. "If someone was down there, they just left." The officer's words echoed in my head. They just left. How? He pointed toward a corner of the basement I hadn't noticed earlier. Behind an old wooden shelf, there was a small hole in the wall, not much more than a tight opening. And behind that old shelving, a narrow, concealed gap led straight through the wall. One of the officers knelt and shone his flashlight into the dark passageway, then looked back up at us with a serious expression. "It leads to the house next door." My body went rigid. The house next door. The silent neighbor. My heart beat so hard I thought it might explode. "They just left." The officer's words echoed in my head. "It leads to the house next door." I couldn't breathe. The police thoroughly searched the basement and soon discovered a pile of other belongings tucked behind some old furniture. Blankets, scraps of food, and a crumpled notebook filled with nonsensical scribbles, repeated phrases, and distorted drawings resembling the layout of our home. Someone had been watching us all along. My wife clutched my arm, her face pale. "We need to leave," she whispered urgently. The police then moved to the house next door, knocking repeatedly. No answer. Eventually, they forced the door open. My wife and I waited anxiously outside, holding each other. But the officers emerged minutes later, shaking their heads. The house was empty. The man, our silent neighbor, had vanished. We moved out within days, never returning. The police assured us they'd keep investigating, but the truth is we never received answers. The house next door remained empty, and the silent neighbor was never found. Occasionally, in the quiet of night, I still feel that unsettling sensation, the feeling of being watched, of something being just slightly out of place, and I wonder if whoever was there might be somewhere else, now, quietly watching someone else. Story 3. Nothing beats a trip among friends. At least that's what we believed when we accepted Tom's invitation. We thought it would be the perfect escape, just us, away from everyday stress. A weekend in a lakeside cabin, sitting on the porch, drinking beers, laughing at old stories. But on that first night, something shattered our bubble of tranquility. We were sitting out on the porch looking over the dark, calm lake when Mike frowned and pointed. "Do you guys see that?" he asked. Far out on the water, barely illuminated by moonlight, was a small fishing boat drifting silently. "Probably someone's boat broke loose," Tom shrugged, unconcerned. Yet something about it bothered me. It felt wrong somehow, as if it shouldn't have been there. We watched it for several minutes, but nothing happened. No sounds, no movements besides the gentle sway of the boat on the lake's surface. Eventually, we brushed it off, returned to our conversation, and forgot about it. When we awoke the next morning, Mike called from outside with urgency in his voice. "The boat's gone." We rushed out to the porch to confirm. The lake was empty, its surface reflecting the gray sky without a single sign of the drifting boat. "Maybe the owner came back and retrieved it," I suggested half-heartedly. But Mike shook his head. "That doesn't explain those," he said quietly, pointing to something else. Our eyes followed his finger, and a chill crept down my spine. On the deck leading to the house were dark, wet footprints, as if someone had emerged from the water and walked straight toward our cabin. The footprints were clear, large, barefoot, and still wet, as if they had just been left. They started at the edge of the dock where water still dripped and led straight toward the cabin. They were fresh enough that moisture still seeped into the wooden planks. Who would wander barefoot in the pitch dark, alone, leaving a boat adrift in the middle of the lake? We decided to follow the tracks. They crossed the deck, climbed a few stairs, and abruptly stopped. They simply disappeared right in front of the back door. "This makes no sense," Mike muttered, bewildered. The footprints ended as if whoever made them had vanished into thin air. The rest of the day passed uneasily. We tried to brush off the discomfort, but those footprints remained etched into our thoughts. We fished, chatted aimlessly, and grilled the meat we'd brought. But each silence brought back the unspoken question: who had been here? That night we built a fire near the house, trying to lighten the mood. Tom was in the middle of a story when Mike, facing the lake, suddenly interrupted him in a frightened whisper. "The boat's back." We all turned instantly, and there it was, much closer to the shore this time. Quiet, motionless, drifting silently on the black water, as if watching us. My entire body tensed. That boat hadn't simply returned by itself. Someone had brought it back, but who? And where was that person now? None of us moved. We just stood there, staring at that dark, silent thing drifting on the water. The fire crackled behind us, the only sound against the oppressive silence. Mike aimed the flashlight toward the boat, illuminating the weathered hull and empty seats. Empty, or at least that's what we thought until the beam briefly passed over something at the bottom. A dark shape, soaked, motionless. There's something there," I whispered, my heart starting to race. The silence seemed to stretch endlessly as we waited for any sign of movement. And then we heard it, a wet scraping sound like something dragging itself slowly against the boat's wooden floor. My pulse quickened. It wasn't just a thing. It was someone. Tom took a step back, eyes wide. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently. But before any of us could react, there was a sudden splash, followed by a sharp scratching sound as something scraped against the boat. Then silence returned, thick and suffocating. We stared, transfixed, at the dark surface of the lake. The water was perfectly still, and in that instant, a terrifying realization dawned on me. If someone had just fallen into the water, why hadn't they resurfaced? My entire body froze. All of us stood there, eyes fixed on the dark, still surface of the lake, waiting. Nothing. No bubbles, no movement, no sound. It was as if whatever had fallen into the water had simply been swallowed whole. "This isn't right," Mike murmured, slowly backing away. No one argued. A heavy silence settled around us. Tom stepped forward cautiously, shining his flashlight across the lake again. Nothing but still, dark water. He turned to face us, his expression stricken. "We go inside now and lock everything," he said quietly, panic clear in his voice. We didn't argue. We rushed into the house, locking doors and windows as if that could somehow protect us. But even as we did, I knew deep down it wasn't enough. Something was terribly wrong out there. Minutes passed as we sat tense and silent, waiting in the dim glow of a single lamp. Then we heard it. Footsteps outside. Slow, heavy footsteps, as if someone soaked through was moving across the deck. My chest tightened. and I exchanged terrified glances with my friends. Tom clutched a kitchen knife, knuckles white. Mike visibly shook beside me. None of us dared to move. The sound continued, one step at a time, inching closer. Then silence again. Thick and unbearable silence. My heart pounded as I strained to listen, praying it was over. But a new sound broke through, chilling me to the core. The doorknob slowly began to turn. Mike let out a muffled gasp of terror. Tom gripped the knife tighter. But the door didn't open. The lock held. Whatever was on the other side stopped trying. Another pause. And then, something even worse. 3 slow knocks. Dry, cold, deliberate. As if whatever stood on the other side was patiently, coldly asking permission to enter. Tom signaled us to remain quiet. We stood there, motionless, hoping whatever it was would simply leave. Minutes stretched painfully, feeling like hours. Then we heard it. Footsteps walking away, slowly crossing the deck, but they didn't head toward the woods. Instead, they moved back toward the water, toward the lake. We heard nothing after that. Silence returned, absolute and unsettling. When we finally dared look outside, the lake reflected only the pale glow of the moon. No movement, no boat, nothing. But we knew something was out there, something that shouldn't exist. The next morning, we packed our things quickly and left without looking back. We didn't ask questions, didn't try to understand, didn't investigate. We just left. Tom sold the house shortly afterward, refusing to speak about what happened. None of us ever returned. But sometimes I find myself awake late at night, remembering that darkness, the footprints and the knocking. And I wonder if whatever was out there might still be waiting, quietly floating in the water, hidden in shadows, watching from somewhere beneath that dark, calm surface.